Ronna Romney McDaniel was pushed out of the RNC by Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee. And after leaving the RNC, she got a contributorship job with NBC News. This was met with surprise, consternation, and a lot of big feelings from employees at NBC News. And this, of course, led to a whole lot of discourse. It resulted in Ronna Romney McDaniel not working at NBC News after, less than a week. Now, the left says a few things. Actually, I'm going to change that from the left. There's a few things that people are saying about this. One, she shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Two, she shouldn't have been fired because this is the kind of ideological purity that each side is demanding, and it's a problem for their viewers. It's a problem for our, national conversations. Three, she should have been fired because of what she said about January 6th, and people who were involved in that shouldn't be platformed. Four, my name has come up quite a bit because the question is this similar or not similar to what happened to Sarah at CNN? What happened to the New York Times folks after they published the Tom Cotton op-ed and, other places that have basically gotten rid of conservatives?
We should also note, just because he's a colleague, Kevin Williamson at The Atlantic.
Yes, I knew I was forgetting someone. So, Steve, with the big feelings, I'm going to start with you because you are also a contributor at NBC News. Is there anything on the reporting side that I'm missing on this? Any relevant details?
No, I think that gets it. I think that's a good summary. I was on Meet the Press last Sunday when this issue arose. Ronna Romney McDaniel gave an interview that Kristen Welker, the moderator of Meet the Press, introduced the segment and said, this is going to be a news interview. This interview was booked before Ronna McDaniel became an NBC contributor, so I'm interviewing her as a newsmaker, not as a colleague. The interview went quite long, I think longer than NBC had planned, longer than we on the panel had expected. And then when we came back from break after that interview, I was on a panel with Chuck Todd, Kimberly Atkins Storr, who's sort of the progressive, and Kristen Welker moderated the discussion. She turned to Chuck Todd first, and Chuck, in what has now been sort of a famous cri de coeur, really let NBC executives have it for hiring Ronna McDaniel. I agree with what Chuck said. I don't think she should have been hired at NBC. And I do think after NBC had made that initial mistake, they shouldn't have continued to employ her. But that doesn't mean that I think, some of the folks at MSNBC and some of the folks on the left are on the side of the angels here, because I do have concerns about exactly the kind of purge at sort of the heart of this that you mentioned with, James Bennett at the New York Times, other instances where not even necessarily conservatives, but often conservatives are pushed out just because the sort of woke mob doesn't want them in their position. But starting in the first place.
But isn't part of the question whether, right, like NBC says they fired her, whatever the right word is, because she had a contract. So to say they fired her, that basically they're going to just pay her all the money that they said, but not require any work from her because of her role around January 6th and election denialism and all that. But I think what the pushback is, pointing to the James Bennetts, the me's, the Kevin Williamsons, is there's always some excuse, but it's not about that. It's about the, far left wing not wanting those voices because any conservative voice is an 11 on the amp.
Yeah.
And so here, fine, it's January 6th. With Kevin, it was abortion. With James Bennett, it was publishing a Tom Cotton op-ed. And with me, it was existing. We'll get to that later.
What's existing?
That's my biggest gripe against you, Sarah.
I think there's some truth to all of that. The reason I don't think Ronna Romney McDaniel should have been hired by NBC has everything to do with January 6th and her work in supporting Donald Trump's stolen election claims and minimizing, trying to help him remain in office after he'd lost an election, and then minimizing January 6th. If you look at what she did from the earliest days, she was boosting the totally unfounded stolen election conspiracy. She pushed election officials in Michigan not to certify the election results and promised to get them lawyers for their trouble. The RNC raised money on Trump's stolen election stuff. They provided a home for that crazy conspiracy-laden press conference with Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others, throwing out one false conspiracy after another. And then if you remember, after January 6th, the RNC put out a statement condemning Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger for their role on the January 6th committee that included the very unfortunate phrase legitimate political discourse to describe what had happened on January 6th and around January 6th. That was a Ronna Romney McDaniel phrase. She said it first in her own words in an interview with the Washington Post. So I think she's guilty of all of these things. She certainly had done Donald Trump's bidding as he tried to steal an election. And I think she played a contributing role, not just a bystander role, in preventing the first peaceful transfer of power that we've seen in the history of the country. That's a big deal. I think it was foolish for NBC to hire her, given all of that.